Hello, I'm here with another real horror story. Tonight's story comes from Reddit user the_red_pencil, and it's titled The House of No Return. I was traveling for work in a developing country in Latin America, and I had one day to myself before my business conference started. I decided to explore the city. After walking around the main square, I came across an old colonial-style house that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. It was 3 stories tall, with balconies on each level overlooking the street. As I walked past, I noticed a faded sign hanging above the door that read Hotel. The peeling paint on the door was black, and the brass knob looked very old. For some reason, I felt compelled to knock on it. A groggy voice said, "Who's there?" in Spanish. An old, shriveled hand opened the door about 6 inches, just enough to peer out through the crack. I introduced myself and told him I was a tourist and asked if he spoke English. "No, sorry," he said. Then he abruptly closed the door. I stood there for a moment, confused by his rudeness, but then I heard commotion inside, and I could hear voices talking and moving about. I knocked again, and this time the man opened the door all the way and he invited me in. He showed me to a small office, which was dimly lit and dusty. The walls were lined with framed photos of various people who I assumed were previous guests. There were also old travel brochures on a table along with what looked to be an ancient computer. He gestured for me to sit down in a creaky wooden chair, while he went to another room. The old man returned with a glass of water and 2 glasses. One of them had a dark brown liquid in it, which I assumed was coffee. I thanked him and took the proffered glass of water. It was ice cold and very refreshing. I talked with the man for a few minutes, and he told me that his name was Ernesto, and that he was the caretaker of the house. He confirmed that the building was once a hotel, but that was no longer in operation. He also mentioned that the owner of the house lived in the upper apartment, and that he would be right back. Ernesto excused himself and disappeared into the hallway. At that point, I started to get the feeling that something was wrong. I began to notice more details about my surroundings. First, there were cobwebs hanging from the corners of the room and light fixtures. Next, I saw cockroaches scuttling across the floor and over the table. Finally, I noticed a strange odor, like dirty socks mixed with decay. Even though it was hot outside, I started to feel cold. I pulled my jacket tighter around me as I waited for Ernesto to return. When he came back into the room, he was accompanied by a woman. She was middle-aged with long, greasy hair, and she wore a stained dress. Her eyes were vacant, and she stared straight ahead without acknowledging either me or Ernesto. He introduced her as his daughter, Maria, and explained that she helped him take care of the hotel, or was it the house? As Maria and I shook hands, I couldn't help but shiver at how cold she was. I mean really cold, as if she were carrying a block of ice in her hand. We exchanged a few awkward words until she turned and walked away. Ernesto apologized for his daughter's behavior and said that she didn't interact much with people. He asked me if I would like to see one of the guest rooms. Of course I said yes. He led me through the house and up a flight of stairs to a landing. At the top of the stairs, we turned toward a hallway that was dimly lit by a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. I walked slowly as I scanned the walls, which were covered with dark stains that looked like blood splatter. I pointed this out to Ernesto, and he shrugged as if it wasn't a big deal. We continued down the hallway until we reached a door at the end. I hesitated for a moment, half expecting the apparition of a bloodied meat-cleaver-wielding maniac to suddenly burst through the door, but I pushed the thought away. Ernesto knocked on the door and I heard a raspy voice say, "Come in!" He opened the door and stepped aside to allow me to enter first. The room was sparsely furnished with a bed in the corner, a nightstand next to it, and a dresser against one wall. There was also a single window with grimy curtains hanging over it. I noticed a large spider web in the corner of the room and several cockroaches scurrying across the floor. Just as I had done earlier, I asked, "Ernesto, do you have any bug spray?" He looked uncomfortable and avoided eye contact. No," he finally said. "But don't worry, they won't bother you." I sensed that something was wrong, so I got out of there quickly. I thanked him for showing me the room and said that I should probably get going. I paid him for the water and the coffee and left. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and asked if there was another way out, because I did and want to walk through the hallway again. He indicated that there was a back exit. I found a door on the far side of the building and walked outside. It led to a narrow alley between the hotel and a brick wall. I thanked Ernesto for his hospitality and said goodbye. As I turned to leave, I noticed a black suitcase sitting on the ground beside the wall. I picked it up and looked at it curiously. It was heavy and seemed to have some sort of lock on it. I tried the handle and it opened easily. Inside, I found a pile of old, dirty clothes, a faded photograph of a young girl, and a leather-bound journal. The photo was in black and white and showed a beautiful Hispanic woman with long, flowing hair. There was also a handwritten caption on the back that said, Maria, 1942. I shivered as I realized that the date was almost exactly 80 years to the day of when I had visited the hotel. Of course, I knew that there was nothing supernatural about the house or its inhabitants, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stumbled upon something dark and sinister. I quickly left the house and walked briskly down the street, glancing over my shoulder to make sure that nobody was following me. After a while, I stopped and turned around to go back, but the house was nowhere to be seen. I walked around, but I couldn't find where I had been. I asked a shop owner if he had seen a colonial-style house recently, but he looked confused and said no. I started to panic. How could a building that I had just been in minutes ago suddenly vanish? Did I imagine the whole thing? It was at that moment that I remembered the journal that I had taken from the room. I searched my bag for it and opened it. The pages were filled with faded ink and what looked like bloodstains. As I read, I realized that it was a diary written by the same Maria who had greeted me in the hallway, and her entries described her life in the house and her strange ability to turn people away forever. After finishing the journal, I felt drained and terrified. I knew that I had to get away from there as fast as possible. I hailed a cab and told the driver to take me to the airport. The whole drive, I kept looking over my shoulder as if expecting to see someone pursuing me. Once I got to the airport and checked in, I collapsed into a chair and tried to calm down. As I sat there waiting for my flight, I knew that I had to decide whether or not to tell anyone about my experience. On one hand, I didn't want to be labeled as crazy or an unreliable narrator. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that something evil was lurking in that house, and I was afraid that someone else might stumble upon it and suffer the same fate as those poor souls trapped inside. I still haven't decided what to do. But as I sit here typing this, I can't help but feel that I may have just doomed myself by writing this account. Who knows? Maybe one of you fine folks will come across it and discover the truth about the House of No Return. So Reddit user the _red_pencil may not have gotten his answer as to whether or not anybody would ever believe his story. But I think we all know that the diary did its job. You can return forever. Yeah, you read that right. This is your host. And if you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe and check out more content. Also, be sure to join our community and chat with other horror fans. Till next time, don't forget, stay safe because horror is everywhere.